my computer wouldn't match the cord to the projector, so that's why we're throwing off here. So the Red Store, built in 1874 during the second period of mining in Gold Hill. So during that period of time, tellurium was discovered, and much of Main Street, a lot of the buildings were built during that period of time. And over the years, the Red Store has been used as a saloon, a brothel, an assay office, millinery shop, dry goods store, grocery store, general store, a home, and gift shop. So it's been continuously lived in and used, all these years. Okay, in the 1880s, Joan showed an earlier picture of the Doc Von Saloon, which I'll have here in a second. But that's, when I went to the Carnegie Library, I looked for pictures of the Red Store, and there were very few pictures of there were really no pictures of just the Red Store. You can get pictures of the Red Store, on Main Street, but not a good shot of it. So I don't have a lot to show you, but I will tell you. So
there it is.
Okay, so Doc Von, we believe, was this guy, I think, and he was running a saloon, and up here he was running a brothel. And
one-stop shopping.
One-stop shop, that's right. And according to a 1969 Daily Camera article, in the 1800s, it was used as the headquarters for the miners. So it was kind of a miners' hangout and
Saloon,
yeah. And we don't know anything about Doc Von really. I don't know where he's buried. I don't know where he went, but he was here for a little while. But we don't even think he was a doctor. So, yeah, but I will tell you one story that is interesting, and Kathleen will let me tell it. But currently Jamshed and Kathleen own the Red Store, and as I understand it, Jamshed was working a few years ago up on the fascia in the soffit area, and pulled off a piece of soffit that was old and rotting, and out came a bunch of dust and dirt, and he thought nothing of it. But then later on, he was cleaning up, and he found a little gold watch from around the 1900s, early, around the turn of the century, or turn of the, and polished it up, and it worked. And it was a man's watch, and so what Jamshed and Kathleen are guessing is that one of the ladies took it from John, and there's a little gap, I guess, up here in the wall, and just kind of shoved it in there, hoping to get it back later on. But it slid down the soffit and got stuck up against the fascia board, and there it sat for 100 years. So kind of a good story. After this period here, it was then an assay office, as far as we know. How are we doing? I'm on this one. And then it was owned, after it was an assay office, probably in the early 1900s, was owned by a gentleman by the name of Morris Davidson, aka Morgan Davidson. I always knew his name was Morgan, but then I found out from Shelley that his name was Morris. So we're not sure about the difference there, but typically he was called Sheeny Davis. Sheeny at the time was a Morris here. He was the only Jewish person in Gold Hill, and Sheeny was a very derogatory term towards Jews at the time. But, everybody called him Sheeny, pretty much, and he arrived probably in the early 1900s. He owned the store probably well into the late 1920s, maybe the early 1930s. But his kind of interesting claim to fame. Go to the next. We have one more picture of him. He's from Russia. He's a Russian Jew, but his claim to fame is that he had a pushcart, and he was selling millinery, dry goods, thread and cloth and all that. And he had a push cart that he would push from Central City through Black Hawk, Nederland, to Ward, to Allen's Park, down to Rowena, and then presumably he would push it down to Boulder to resupply, and then push it back up the hill. And I have a picture of
He didn't own a horse. He did it all by hand.
He didn't have a donkey. He was very poor. So I Googled a picture of a push cart just to give people a picture of what he was probably, probably not painted blue, probably not that nice, but he had something that he was pushing, up and down the rocky, rutted roads of the mountains. So you can imagine how difficult that must have been.
Did he sell milk out of it? And have a couple daughters that, no fiddling on the roof? Okay.
No, none of that.
There was an earlier photo of the inn that had a push cart with a cloth top.
Oh, maybe that was his, yeah.
Right next to it, could that have been his
That,
maybe?
I guess in theory, could have been his, yeah. Mr. Davis died in 1935, and he was buried in Lakewood. And one last thing to say is that he also got some of the floor from the Citadel of Sin, the roller rink, and so he's the one who is credited with joining the two buildings together, or at least building another building, the one-story addition onto the original Red Store.
Very cool.
Yeah. And Tim Walter's account of visiting the store was that there was hardly anything to sell, a few dusty spools of thread. So later on, the building then was sold to a Mr. Miller, and I don't have much information about him. I'm presuming that it was a general store at that time, and then later it was sold to the McClellans, and they ran it as a general store. It became a cafe around that time as well, a general store, gift shop. In 1938, a gas pump was added to the front of it, and it was the second gas pump in Gold Hill. The other one was, put in by the Googes. So then the Finns bought it in the early 1960s, where it became their home, as well as a grocery store, which was called the Nugget. And I was reading Ellie Cox's autobiography, and she talked a lot about how the Red Store was just kind of a natural place for people to hang out. There were only about 40 year-rounders in Gold Hill at the time, and people just naturally congregated in the Red Store because it was always warm and welcoming, and they would play square dancing records, and the square dancing records were so worn and rutted and scratched that if it began skipping or something, people just kept on doing their moves regardless of it. And if you didn't know the move, somebody would just grab you and pick you up and make you do what you were supposed to do. So it was very much a hangout, as it is today. The Finns traded the home in around 1966 with the Gibsons. So the Gibsons moved in. I guess they just traded homes, and the Gibsons ran it as a general store and a gift shop. And then finally, in what year, Kathleen? When did you guys bought it? In 80s, something? Anyway, it was sold to Jamshed and Kathleen, and they've operated it as a gift shop and and just having handcrafted gifts ever since. So let's see, and that's it.
All right.